Hey, everybody. This is Tinderbox Meetup, the last Tinderbox Meetup of 2023. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. Just a reminder that on January 7th, we are hoping to have Brian Jenks, whose work with computers for people with ADHD and autism, etc. We discussed a couple of weeks back. And I've posted a YouTube talk he gave as a teaser in the chat. So without further ado, here's Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the meetup. Thank you very much, and happy holidays and happy vacation breaks to everyone around the world. So typical format of our meetups is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves. We then talk about any particular project that somebody might be working on or new things that they want to share with the community. And then we jump into a theme. And this week's theme is about note-taking books and resources that we've been leveraging to learn about this whole concept of personal knowledge management and note-taking, which is exciting. But before we jump into that theme, I'm going around the room. I don't see anyone new. So let's move to the next element of the agenda. Who's working on what that's really interesting, and do they have a question or something kind of cool to share or show real quick for everyone to understand? Anybody?
I have a scheduling question for Mark.
Okay.
Mark, a quick look at the way that my calendar thought the meetups were going. I would have one land on the 6th instead of the 7th. So are we changing the alternation in the new year? I don't care.
Yeah.
I just want to know what it was.
I think you're right, but I think that I simply juggled it wrong. But there being the 2-week hiatus, I don't think it's going to confuse people too much. And obviously the 24th and 31st are going to be impossible.
Right. Yeah. So no complaint about that at all. So just at some point, what the calendar is going to be sort of going forward in the forum would be great.
Yeah, and also I think the implication there, Mark, is, well, I don't think anybody cares. Where it can mess people up is if they've created repeating events in their calendar.
Yes. Yeah. No,
right?
I agree, and
we'll
I will check in on that. And I'm hoping to line up some guest speakers and get a little bit more advance notice out on landmarks on the calendar.
And just speaking for myself, if there were a calendar feed from just a shared Google Calendar or iCal or something for it, and it moved around, I probably wouldn't even notice. I just know when to show up.
That's actually not a bad idea. Why don't Mark and I, you and I offline, let's set that up and we'll create a Google Calendar for the meetups, and I'll take that action item and publish it. I like that. All right. Let me give myself a note so I don't screw it up. Lovely. Awesome. So who's working on what before we jump into our broader discussion? Anybody have anything they want to share, discuss? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, we touched on this before the meetup, but there's a discussion in the forum that is purportedly about Chinese text and preview. And in fact, we paired off on a different problem that's still very much a problem. And fixing that old tutorial would be good. But underneath this, I think we have a very bright and motivated screenwriter whose English may not quite be up to the task of explaining what he's doing. And I'm just thinking that there's probably someone in this community with enough Chinese to elucidate what he's trying to accomplish. Figuring out, as we've seen many times here, figuring out what your goal is often the crucial step in fixing a Tinderbox problem.
All right. First, on that note, I will fix that tutorial in about 15 days once my big project's done. But
So-
Hey,
One of the things is I've fixed the original tutorial, and based on that, I've been able to figure out for the version of the tutorial that's using Chinese, I think Chinese or Japanese, it matters not because I can't read it in that sense, but I've managed to work out from the code. So I've now fixed the HTML of the stuff that's using Chinese, which hopefully will at least help this person sort of take it from there.
oh yeah, so if that was a screenwriting tutorial, we did that like 2 years ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. So that was the stumbling around mess. So the new Michael of today would definitely probably not make most of the same mistakes.
and my suspicion is this is usefully identifying a actual bug in the file manager, the export file manager, which was written and mostly finished about 20 years ago, so well before Unicode existed. And I think there may actually be a loophole there that we need to close up. But that's not actually going to, I suspect that's not actually going to help the screenwriter write screenplays.
Actually, a useful thought. Sorry, and I because I see Paul has his hand up, but just on this theme before we probably tie it off is that one of the things I actually took out from working on these files and trying to merge them is that sort of note to future self: if writing something that's going to be used as something like a demo or a sort of template type file, is that a very good reason to use badges and colors is that it makes it a lot easier. If someone is then writing in a language you don't understand, you can at least say, oh right, that's a blue note, and that now turns up here. And that actually, I realize, is tremendously useful, because I totally understand the problem of of not working in your own language and the additional overhead that causes. But if you're, funnily enough, the HTML works like the HTML. So in that, bits like that, or the action code, is kind of easy to follow along, but certainly being able to just see, oh right, the note they're using there is using this prototype, and I know that because it's colored green or it has a blue badge or something, is a useful affordance in sharing terms I hadn't really thought of before.
Yeah, so in other words, colors and HTML and regex, there are some universal languages independent of any underlying overriding cultural language. Interesting. Mr. Paul.
Yeah, just a quick shout out to Mark Bernstein for the table view that's under development in 9.6.2 that I've seen on Backstage. Boy, that has added a level of functionality to my documents that I never predicted I'd use, but that is great.
Yeah, and we know it's not public yet, but I'll make the comment too, is when I first saw it, I'm like, yeah, but so much of that's already there in Attribute Browser, which it is. However, I was doing something quick and dirty last week, and I'm like, the new table thing. And what would have taken me 3 or 4 minutes in Attribute Browser took me like 10 seconds with the new table feature. So pretty awesome. The one thing I might add, Mark Bernstein, to that note is, and it will be interesting to think about it in terms of the tutorial or help on the table view, is, so for those that will eventually get it when it becomes public release, there's a new view that you can actually quickly create tables from child views in your attributes, or children in your attributes. Is that when you copy the table, it creates the CSV element, but a lot of people may not be aware about the text transformation in Excel, for example, where you can convert a column to text to columns. So you can paste that CSV into Excel, and then if you use the convert text to columns, it will convert that pasted CSV into columns. And otherwise, someone that's not familiar with that might have to try to use formulas or something like that. So it would be cool to see if we could find a way to educate people with that, or maybe that's just a quick tutorial we do when it comes live. All right, awesome. Anything else? Thanks, Paul. Okay, and if we don't mind, if people want to, and I kind of showed it a couple weeks ago, but if people want to see something I'm working on, I can kind of share the power of Tinderbox. Other ways we can jump right into the
let's see it.
All right, so let me, it's going to be really messy, but let me share my screen with you, and you're going to see a bunch of stuff up on screen. All right, so let me discuss what's going on. So I'm working on my doctoral dissertation, and I finally got approved. So essentially about a few weeks ago, I collected 2,608 responses from a survey I did in the United States of adults US are 18 or over. I had 28 questions, or I had a total of about 53 different factors in the study, and I needed to go through and find those elements that were significant within the study. And so I have not, I supposedly had learned statistics 20 odd years ago, and I had subsequently forgot all of it and had to relearn it in the last 10 days. And so I found this software package called Stata, which is is very similar to SPSS and other statistical packages. What I've since found is SPSS is no longer working on Mac Silicon. So I needed to pop over to and find this alternative software called Stata. I've also found some open source stat software that kind of was nice because it bootstrapped me. The open source stuff got me started, but it wasn't powerful enough or tinderboxy enough for me to understand it as well. It was too much UI actually. So then once I converted over to Stata, I went over there. A few interesting things I've noted in using the tool called Stata, and I'll walk you through it in a second, is one, it took me a bit to figure it out, but the semantic and the command lines that they're using are very, very similar to Tinderbox. So even like there's this replace command, which is exactly functionally similar to the replace command of Tinderbox. And so as I'm kind of going through this process, I'm learning these transformations that are very similar. Similarly, when you leverage it, if I like type help and I look at concepts like regress, which is to be able to run a regression, Stata will pop up and give you its help files, and start explaining like, here's the regress command, here's the different options that you can run on the command. And again, this is without my experience with Tinderbox, it would have been impossible for me to figure this out in the last week and a half or so. But because of that, I've been able to kind of break things down and understand, okay, this is very similar to what we see in ATB-ref and how various Tinderbox commands are done. What I have learned though is this then quickly gets into very arcane specialist language, which it takes hours to kind of tease through and to figure out. And so I'm appreciating how much work Mark have done with ATB-ref over the years to kind of make this stuff easy and transformational. So to kind of go back and continue on with kind of the tutorial here, that's the wrong spreadsheet. What I have done or figured out was I went out and created this, I collected all this data from running my survey. And what Stata allows you to do is create this this set of command line instructions that they call a do file. So you can basically go into Stata and say, like, if you run this command in Stata, Stata will go and automatically run all of these different commands that you want it to do on your data. So when you're loading your data file, you can automatically run a script that says, go and run these transformations for me, go and label these items in this way, so that that makes the data a little bit more easier. So what I started to realize then is, as I was going through the process, much like an engineering code book, I started to think through, well, how do I keep track of all of the various derivations of this of the different regression modelings and these tools as I'm going through this process of teaching myself statistics again. And so I was running some earlier regressions, and I was going through the process. And then I realized that there was some what's called heteroscedasticity in my data. So I needed to rerun all of those regressions again to address for that. But running these first models took me about 10 days to understand and learn. Rerunning the models, because of the rigor that Tinderbox gave me, took about 2 hours. And then I've spent the next 3 days going through and learning and leveraging, like, well, what does heteroskedasticity mean, and how do I interpret this? So I'll show you another element that I brought into play here, which has been great, which is another tool that's been brought into the process, which is ChatGPT. And so what I've been doing here is, actively using ChatGPT, saying, how does, what is this, what does this mean? What does the statistic mean? How do I interpret this? I'll give you a great example. So here's data I've gotten up out of my regression. So I'll pop that into the tool and say, how do I interpret this? Or what does this command line mean in Stata, and how do I actually use it? So I've been going kind of back and forth through this iterative process between Stata, its help files, Tinderbox, and ChatGPT to kind of learn and teach and reteach myself statistics along the way. So long story short, where Tinderbox has gotten really helpful was, and the other thing I've learned is, it's not just, and it's like writing. You don't just run one regression, you run multiple models until you start finding the elements within your data set that actually are adding statistical significance to your result. And I'll show you an example of one thing I've figured out. So I've created I'll just call this one test, so people might be watching. So I created a prototype in Tinderbox called stats output, and I've added in several different attributes into this. So the model I want to run, the statistic I'm running, the variables I want to be driving, and then what the static commands are that I'll want to be doing and reproducing. So in this example, for instance, if I look at that regression, I can go and I go like this, and I'll fix that. And these are actually that's my old stuff that doesn't work anymore. So if I go down here, and then the other thing, using a combination of using ChatGPT versus Tinderbox, I was asking ChatGPT, like, once I've run a regression, what diagnostic statistics do I need to be running to be able to validate the integrity of the regression? So I started learning things about, like, Cronbach alphas, and getting the beta details, and finding significance levels. And there's a concept called the variance inflation factor, and Wald chi-squared tests. And so as I was learning this process, I was able to kind of incrementally layer in, all right, I run a regression, I get the regression result, I then want to check on the Cronbach alphas of that regression, I want to then run my betas, I then want to get significance factors, I then want to test, is this model better than the model that came before it? So then I now need to run these. So going through this outline has helped me realize, then, here are kind of the steps that I'll want to take when doing my particular analysis. And so then with that, I was able to start being able to reproduce and leveraging the attribute browser. So for example, for this particular regression, these are the variables I'm going to be running against this dependent variable. Here's the formats that I'll want to be doing to be able to format the numbers of the output coming out of Stata. Here's the static command I want to be using, and then I can run a stamp that will pull all these elements together, or I can reproduce them myself. And so let me give you an example of that. So if I go down here, and I'll just create myself a test regression, and then what I can do here, actually, let me do it this way. And then I'll stop just to show you the power of what's going on here and the details. So then I'll call this one test. And let's say I was starting from new. Okay, and I'm like, okay, I figured out all the variables, all the things I want to test. I've been using Tinderbox to help me incrementally evolve my model. So now I can go ahead, just grab this and pop over to Stata and run that regression. So what Stata now has done is it's given me the regression file, or the details that have come from that. And then this comes back to what Mark and I were talking about earlier. In Stata, I can now copy this table, and I can copy it. I can copy it as a tab delimited file, or I can copy it as HTML. So let me copy it as the tab delimited file. And if I just go over into Tinderbox, and let me reopen Tinderbox, and I paste that in, I get this. right? And so you're like, well, what does that mean? So this is where it gets interesting. If you open up BB Edit, which is another tool in our toolbox, I can take that output that we just pasted and I can paste it in here. So now I can actually see what's going on with the data. The table that Stata is giving me is actually, these little triangles means tabs, and then the dots mean spaces. So the table that Stata is giving me is a tab delimited table that's mixing tabs and spaces. And it gets really interesting in that they're in Stata here, they are actually, I've learned, opting for visual prettiness than actual functional underlying code. So this actually looks like a column between these two things. And so I would expect there to be a tab here so I could actually break those into columns, but they're actually, putting in spaces to make it actually look pretty versus then that data actually being functional. And so that's where I kind of identified those things. So now that I know how the text is being formatted, I can now come back to Tinderbox and say, all right, I need to transform this data in a way that actually will work for me. So I went ahead here, and it's a little wonky because I've been playing with it, but I've said, okay, let's go now do some text replacing using regex. Let's replace all the tabs with pipes. Let's find the other patterns, 6 spaces I want to be replacing with a pipe. And then I'm doing 6 spaces first, because then when I go replace the next set of patterns of 3 spaces, I want to get another pipe. So when I do that, what that lets me now do is I can apply this transformation to this code. And now I can go in here, and this has essentially allowed me to convert. There's a couple little things I still need to add here and I haven't fixed. This has allowed me to now convert the basically tab delimited, space delimited table coming out of Stata into Tinderbox, which now that allows me to render this into a markdown delimited table. And so now I've got a functional table that I can work with that's consistent. So then what I can do is I can copy this table. And now if and because I'm using Pandoc and Word, I can publish this out of Tinderbox into Word as a perfectly formatted table. But with the type of analysis I need to be doing a little bit more. So what I'll do over here is I now want to, and so just to kind of emphasize this one a little bit more. So then what I've been doing is I've been running, now that I got this figured out, I've now realized I can run this process 6 times, where I'm looking at my background factors, then I layer in my attitude factors, then I layer my personal norm factors, then I layer my perceived behavioral control factors, then I layer in my trust factors. And that allows me to create what's called a stepwise multiple hierarchical regression to be able to step through this process. And so because I've got this table in a format that actually Excel will then accept reliably as well. Let me make this zoom in a little bit. All right, I can go like this. So this is the output. But if I go to like model 1, I can paste now in that output from Tinderbox, and I get a perfectly formatted cell. And I can do that for the other tables that Stata has been giving me, like my beta tables, my significant tables, my etc. And so then I was able to then, by combining those elements together, I can get the outputs that I need from each of the individual regressions. And I do that process 6 times. So now I can pull that into a consolidated model. And now I can look at each of the different stages of my model, where I can say, if I'm just looking at background factors, here are the statistics that are appropriate for, rendering whether or not this model holds, whether or not it's great. Like there's a couple of statistics I've learned in the last week that talks about like the AIC and BIC, the Bayesian Information Criterion, that says once you compare models together, as this number is getting lower and lower, that's telling you that this model is getting successfully tighter and tighter to fit, meaning this model is becoming more and more predictive. So what I've been able to do then is zero all over this down to now I have a model. So out of the 53 original predictors I had in my model, I've been able to zero this down into 15 statistically significant predictors that are now enabling me to be able to then go to the next process, and looking through the step. And then the one last thing I'll show you, a couple more things I'll show you, and then I'll be going from here, is I then can go back to Stata, which is then, because I've done that, it's now allowed me to then come in and build a structural equation model against the theory of theory of planned behavior that actually then gives me yet another way to start validating and looking at the data. So great, got all the pieces together. Tinderbox has helped me create a massive amount of efficiency and consistency of how I'm incrementally rolling out and deploying all of this. So then once that's done, I've now got all of my different data points. I've also got several other tables, but where's the one I wanted to show you? Descriptive statistics. So I've got where is it? Oh yeah. So then I've run a whole, in a similar fashion, I ran a number of other kinds of crosstabs tables where I was able to look at my data from the perspective of like the number, the people that participated in my study versus the US Census. So I've now got this data compared to that data. So then I can open up a second window in Tinderbox and start my analysis. So then I can start saying, all right, let's go through the process. So here are my descriptive analyses. And this is where it gets really kind of fun. I'm now writing up the results of my study. And I was able to pop over here and say, okay, let me grab this table over here, bring it over here, paste that in here. I can now start running, this study is 200, 600 people, 49% men, because I know that from the statistical output, how it differs from the census. Then I can delete that. Then I can go through. And then likewise, I can come back here and say, okay. And then, so now I'm able to start going back and forth between my stats output and my analysis of what all of this means. And by the end of next week, I will have the results of my dissertation completely written up, if not half of the implications of it done. And again, the other nice thing about this is, as I'm going through the process, I'll just give you an example right here, implications, right? This is giving me the ability to incrementally develop both not only my results document as I'm writing it, but also as I'm writing my results, I want to stay focused on my results. But if something pops into my head that says, that might be an implication I need to consider, I can have another container here and say, just like implication one, implication. So I can quickly take a note on what I think that implication is going to be, but then quickly go back to staying focused on working on my results. So that way, when my results are finally done and I turn to looking at my implications, I'm not starting from a blank piece of paper with my implications. I've already got like 20 or 30 implications that kind of popped into my head, but weren't refined as I was going through the process. So this kind of just demonstrates how I've leveraged quite a few tools to create some thought. So I know it was a lot, and once the dissertation is actually done, I'll create tutorials on all of this. But I thought I'd share it with you in the heat of the moment as it was happening, because I just figured out this, and I'll give you one last example of that just figured out. I spent the last 15 hours trying to figure out this concept of case-wise regression. And these are various different commands, blocks of commands that I was trying to figure out and running within Tinderbox as I'm interacting with Stata. And so this one, if I show you this, what this will do is, if I paste this into Stata, this is a series of one-line commands, much like we do in Tinderbox with edicts, rules, and stamps, that will suggest what I want the tool to do. And so when I run this, let me just go line by line. What this says is, go grab my data file, set up all the data tables, run a regression, run a Cook's analysis, run a robust regression because my heteroscedasticity issues, then run predictions on the residuals and the leverage models, and then label that data and then push that data to an Excel file that I'll call like file number 11, because everything good goes to 11. And then if I run that, all of that gets run. And then if I come over here, I now have a new file called diagnostic 11, which I now can open up. I can then run a pivot table on that. And then taking that pivot table, just a minute, move this over the screen. Taking that pivot table, I can then drop in like my age variable. Where is age? Here it is. I'll drop in my age variable here. And then I'll drop in my cases variable here. And I'll add age in there again. And so what this is telling me, based on my data now, I have 33 outliers that are potentially influencing my regressions and the predictability of it. I have 2,420 regular observations, and I have 150 ones that also have some kind of high leverage in that. And what I've since learned in statistics is that within 2 degrees of confidence, so 5% of your number, it's okay to have some outliers. So if I go like this, and I say, so if I go like this and I say times 0.05, that tells me if I have 133, anything of less than 133 items or that are significantly challenged, I may need, and I'm kind of, for my research, I'm well within that range, 180-ish, 33 is really the only ones I care about. So this is telling me my data is good. And so in other words, this is yet another example of how I've been leveraging Tinderbox to kind of incrementally formalize and capture the code, the line codes. And this is a consolidated version. At one point, I had about 15 of these different Cook's command line notes with different versions of the order of these commands, because I absolutely had no idea what I was doing. It was more like monkey banging against wall to see what happens. And then after like the 30th time of doing that, insight, the terminology started making sense. I started understanding what a root mean squared was, where the first time I had no idea what it was. And so again, this incremental process of leveraging Tinderbox as a tool for helping me learn and understand the other tools, just incrementally invaluable. Right, so there you go. That's what I've been working on the last 10 days. And that's why I've disappeared off of the forum for the last couple of weeks, is I've just been focusing on this. Thoughts, comments, questions, reactions? Or if I just stun you all into stupor and silence.
I'll pick one up because there's a conversation going on the side here, and David rightly pointing out that okay, so some of the sort of terminologies that we have a field DF3 happens to be age. How would you guess? And I point out that I know from the conversation we had the other day that you're catching that. But if I'm correct, the reason you got all these short and mnemonic titles are not because you necessarily want to, but that's more that you've got things like Stata that are work fine, but where they haven't progressed is they don't think in terms of, it's not designed in UI terms. It's not designed to have tooltips all over the place, so that when you have something, and if you don't have enough room to call it whatever you want to call it, because age itself is also a proxy for something, is that so you have to use short codes, and often you may not be able to record the meaning of that short code where you want.
Correct.
But certainly if you're catching in the Tinderbox, when it comes to the output side, A, for the writing, and B, most importantly, for your future self. So when you look at this in 6 months or a year's time, you're going to actually remember. And that doesn't stop you using these other tools.
Yeah, and
But
then,
their job, you know, someone like Stata or SPS's job is not to make, you know, sexy self-explanatory headings.
right.
It would be nice if it did, but you can sort of see, you know, different technologies doing different things. That's not where the heads of the people who design this sort of software
Right.
clearly is. And, you know, that's just how life rolls.
And let me show you another example of that. So here's my survey, right? And if you go in here, this is where those terms are coming from. These are made up by me. So is your primary residence in the US? You know, screening question 2. You know, in the last 6 months, have you gone online to use the internet? Screening question 3. If I scroll all the way down here, I say, you know, how do you identify? Yeah, here you go. How old are you? You know, so I've, you know, so that number is a code that I've done myself to basically collapse the question, how old are you, down to a code. And then when you get, and then I send this, you know, I take these questions and I stick them up into the survey tool. I happen to use a company called Innovate MR to help me with my survey. And they come back with a, that I'll show you the original data so you can see all the pieces of they come back with a basically an Excel file that says, you know, here's each, you know, here's the record ID for the individual, and here is the responses that they gave me within the survey, right? And so there was a total of, you know, BN worth of questions I asked people. Here is the DN3. Here is the code that they responded to 6 to the question of how old are you? And then what I've since learned in this process is what you get back from the survey company is what's called a data map to your element. So when I ask the question, how old are you? They map the values 1 through 7 to the more readable version. So what 6 means is 55 to 64 years old. And so then when I was able to take that, if I go back to the Stata do file, and show you that, here it is. In the Stata file, I'm able to say, okay, let's go ahead and create a label called age. Where is it? It's in here somewhere. All right, but you'll get the, oh yeah, here you go. Here's great. Let's define a label called age, 18, 25, you know, 6 means 55 to 64. And then I come down here and say, I want to apply the value of the label age to the variable df3. And so then when you're in a tool like Stata, and you actually go look at your data, another kind of interesting cut to do. What Stata will do for you is it actually makes the data a little bit more readable for you. Or if I go to, where's my age variable? If I go to df3, here's df3, and what, come on. No, df3 is back here. Sorry, my mouse is messing with me. So here's df3, and you'll see the underlying data is 6, but Stata is overlaying the label I gave it to that so I can actually read it. And so again, this is, we've seen a review of several tools, several processes of me learning how to do research, but it all pulls back to Tinderbox as the central tool to help me actually take my notes, incrementally make sense of all of this. And then ultimately, and this is the most important thing for me, making this process repeatable. So if I come back 6 months from now, I've got all the instructions of what I need to do to be able to reproduce the results within minutes for anybody that wants to say, you know, they read my dissertation and they say, well, prove to me that that number is actually accurate. Well, I can say, here's the Stata file, here's my data file, here's my Stata do file, and here are my Tinderbox instructions. Go do it yourself. And that could be, and that person challenging me could be me 6 months from now. And so kind of the final remark I'll say is, one, my dissertation chair is exceptionally excited because I've been working on this for 20 years and she can't wait for it to be done and me out of her life in this context. But 2, I walked her through this process and she thinks she's, she wants to co-write a paper with me to submit to an academic journal that's now focusing on repurposable academic methods, of which she thinks this is very unique, especially with the tool Tinderbox at the core. And I've just shown you how I've now been using Tinderbox for the quantitative part of my research. There's a whole other qualitative element of my dissertation that we'll go through that shows you how I took 33 unique interviews, broke them all down, coded them all, wrote that up, and all of that was done in Tinderbox as well. And what was exciting about that qualitative use of it for research was I was able to create stamps and use various functionality that as I was highlighting different quotes in people's interviews in Tinderbox, that was mapping directly back to the second in the actual video. So then when I produce an output out of Tinderbox, it provides a link next to the quote. And if I click on that link, it will actually open up the raw video to the exact point where that person in the video said that thing. So I could then validate the actual words that came out of their mouth versus the garbage that came out of the audio to text translation, which sometimes is difficult to hear, or it's not as word for word accurate. And so that was another set of methods that I've developed with Tinderbox at the core of all of this. So thank you for bearing with me as I shared my last 10 days of doing nothing else but this. But I thought you guys would enjoy it. All right, and Kim just finished his doctorate recently too, or a while back.
Yeah, I used SPSS.
I'm sorry, guys were talking over each other.
I was saying I use SPSS on my PC, and I heard that it's not supported on the Mac, latest version of the Mac Silicon. But SPS is all set up. I mean, what you're doing right now is just a complete learning environment of learning a new application, and my hats off to you. But yeah, SPS is so simple. I mean, I'd just buy I'd buy a PC and slap on SPSS.
But Tinderbox doesn't work on a PC.
I know. I'm just kidding, but I'm just saying.
And there's a whole bunch of other reasons why I wouldn't do that. And now that I've learned Stata, and again, I got to tell you, because of Tinderbox, learning Stata really wasn't that hard. As soon as I got over the fact that I was looking at all this stuff that looked like Egyptian hieroglyphics, and as soon as I started using the Rosetta Stone of ATBRef as a means of making a translation between ATBRef and the Stata files, and that took about 2 days for my brain to rewire. It all started just coming out, and now it's just another language that I've got in my toolkit, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, my head's off to you. That's amazing amount of work. SPS has just pull downs. You enter your data, and you just measure it, and everything's a pull down from SPSS. So
well, let me show you that. This is where, again, a tool like Stata, and I'm not trying to overly sell Stata here, but this is pretty cool. If I show you,
this is Tinderbox, right?
Yeah, but if I show you the menus, so what Stata will do is you can come up here to statistics, and they've got pull downs too. But the great thing about Stata is once you actually submit whatever you did in the pull down, it generates the code it used, the command line code it used to do that. And then the command line code is just so much faster, much like action code, so that I start with the GUI, figure out and that's what taught me how to which commands mean what and which options mean what. So I started with the GUI to kind of slowly get there. And then once I got there, I could then convert that into command line writing and then pulled that into Tinderbox for repeatable documentation of the process.
Wow. So that's the GUI interface. Okay, so it's easier.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so that's the wickedly cool fun I've been having for the last 10 days.
It's interesting this. One of the projects I'm involved at the moment, so back to some active research, is about reusability. What's really interesting here is just how much metadata you need that doesn't come for free, which you have to create. The assumption always is with a silent eye roll, well, can't the software do it for me? Well, no, because it doesn't know what you know, and it doesn't know why you did what you did. And it's quite interesting looking at tools like Stata, and there will be others similar. It seems to me this is like doing provenance from the 1980s. What hasn't moved ahead is, so because there hasn't been a pressure and no one's finished, also clearly someone hasn't worked out to monetize it. But, if you were designing it today, I don't think you design it that way, because that would look perfectly at home on a green and black screen.
Yes.
With 60 columns.
Yeah.
So that's what you're looking at. And I don't mean that unkindly, but that's why it looks a bit weird. But the provenance is there. That's, which is really, really important. But now you've got to do quite a bit of hacking just to get the provenance aligned to tell the tale. And so one of the problems with, everyone's sitting around saying, why aren't we getting more money out of our research? Why can't I reuse stuff or find other things similar? Because there is no metadata. There is nothing to answer the question of, show me all, who else is using Quantonium? Well, we don't know, because no one recorded that. There's a big, massive gap to fill.
And what I really like with this, what I've learned in this process too, is I'm kind of going back to, middle school, where the teacher says, show me your work. And Tinderbox is helping me show myself my work incrementally, much like an engineering lab book, which Bill Schwartz often talks about. Yeah, so it's just terribly exciting, seeing all these different pieces come together. And then what's also really interesting as well is, and another reason why I like Tinderbox in this process so much is, as I learn it, I can start dropping away the affordances of having to have some of the instructions, because now I know them. And the great thing about Tinderbox is I can move those now out of the way into another file of my Tinderbox, because those were the instructions I'll write in the textbook I'll write up later. And I'll then simplify them down to just the ones I need to be doing the work. And so it allows me to maintain the broader set of words that got me to where I've got, and then focus on just the words that I need to do the work in any given moment. Much like a meditation koan or something like that. So it's kind of that broad spectrum is, I just found incredibly helpful. Mr. Eddie.
Funny how the topic veers from the British side, from the right side of the pond. The topic veers into metadata. So a tad of history is from a British government grant in the mid-60s, because computing was coming out of manufacturing, with the wartime manufacturing plants scattered all over the place, and what dimension are you using, et cetera, et cetera. So bill of materials was just burned into the genes of anybody doing manufacturing. And the British government grant helped build a product called Data Manager, a product called MSP, Manager Software Products, out of Leicester. Came to the States here in 1973. The first license was Aetna in 1973. And I hunted down a little firm that did good names. And this is, I apologize, not really, but I have to say it. My rants about good names, I found a little firm that had a piece of software that automated the enforcement of good names. And it turned out, he was British, from 73 to about 81, he was the salesman flying around North America selling this central data dictionary product, Data Manager, all caps, one word, to Boeing, Shell Oil, U.S. Treasury, U.S. Army, First National Bank of Chicago, 3M, you name it, because they all had exactly the same problem, lack of meaningful documentation, as Mark just said.
Yeah.
No one knows what's already been done. We set up that R&D place out in the boonies so they wouldn't be interrupted by the politics of headquarters. It's just normal. And so this world of the data dictionary collapsed in the late 80s, early 90s, when the mantra was, we're going to rewrite all these crappy old legacy systems in client server. So here we are, we have the client server, the web, and now we have cloud. Now cloud is sort of fading behind us. They're finding out that it's more expensive than actually your own closet. And AI is entering the mainstream. But basically, the statistics on running a good metadata shop from 900 sales. The difference between sale and useful use is, of course, never spoken of. 900 sales in North America. As of 2003, that's 20 years ago, there were maybe 50 left on maintenance. So that's less than a 5% survival.
Yeah.
Now I see I'm up to my eyeballs in this whole issue of provenance. Where the fuck did this thing come from? Where's it go? I mean, you have no idea. And the challenge is, am I the senior guy here? I'm 76. Is anybody everybody else is younger? Anybody over 70 here?
All right.
One.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mel is.
Yeah. My generation of mainframers is leaving.
You're gonna go hop on the asteroid?
No. But the thing is, the systems are not being replaced. They're being built on top of.
Well, yeah, and that's the age-old story too of why are railroad tracks the size they are. Well, it's the with
Two horses,
butts because of the Roman chariots. But
yeah, and so that magnificent display, Michael, is the documenting of your own work. Now the challenge is, I want to see you pick this thing that up, put it in a deep freezer, put it on a USB memory stick, and put it in the deep freeze, and revisit it in 10 years. How much of that will you have retained? How much?
Go ahead. Pretty much what?
Well, you did. I mean, obviously, Mark Anderson pointed out that, and it's you can track the metadata annotation down to DF3.
Yeah,
you can, right? But that's But no, it's not you that has to pick this up in 10 years. It's someone else.
Yeah, but the nice thing is all of those elements are in there because of attributes. The one and I can show you this. So here's the other elements of the process that I didn't actually show.
Yes, please.
So if I go here, for example, to that very thing, I needed to run some counts as well. So what are my dependent variables? My there's 57 of them. And each of them has their own attribute, their code and their construct that they work with. And then again, so a lot of this is quick and dirty. I'm not necessarily going for pretty. I'm just going to get it done. So then I'm judiciously using the functions of stamps. So I was trying to play around with some ideas of do I need to generate some square root methods? So I was using Tinderbox to go collect all the children, grab the codes, and then generate me a square root. So then I can now got a square root command or log command. So then I can use a square root or log transformation. So as part of my documentation, every one of my variables are linked to their names and linked to their codes. So that's all there and imminently repeatable. And 10 years from now, because this is all fundamentally text files, I'll be able to go through that process. The other thing, which is actually kind of fun too, to show you this, is if you look at this code, I can have it go and run a bunch of code, but then here it's actually exporting out images out of Stata, but then using my templates that I built in Tinderbox, those images actually will get apply it. Take a second to render. I'll actually get maybe the qplot will render. Yeah, those images. Oh, there it is. It just took a little while to render. Those images will actually get displayed in Tinderbox. So I can actually create and generate the images and the media files out of another tool. And because I've built the patterns for myself, and I tell Tinderbox through the attributes what paths my files will be for this particular piece of research, I now have all of the, and so then because I'm using Pandoc as my export tool, I can now export all of this, including the images and all associated media files into the output into a Word file. So that's also part of this process. The other thing I was going to show is Paul had asked how many notes are in this file. There's almost 11,000, nearly 12,000 notes, almost 7,000 words, 700,000 words. Bunch of links, 0 performance issues. And then in terms of incremental formalization too, there's many steps that I've been going through and doing the research. One of them was the questionnaire development. And again, this is, those are my hypotheses, but here are the, that's my draft, here's the draft survey, and here are all my questions. So I've actually been building my questions in Tinderbox too. So that Word file you saw, my questions, are all automatically being developed in Tinderbox as well. And with every major revision of the questionnaire, all I need to do is copy the one, change the formatting so I know it's old, and then go back to working on the next revision of that one for me. So I've also got multiple versions and history of the evolution of my questionnaire. And then when I actually got into executing the research, you can come down here, and this is where I was showing where I went into my interview analysis. And you'll see here, I actually anonymized the speaker, the interview candidate from like to DBA interview number 8. And then I just went through and highlighted all of the different comments and thoughts that they were giving me, and then was using Tinderbox. And then that was the method of showing how I was bringing that right back to the moment in time. This comment happened at that 11-second mark within the video. And that links back using a hook mark and URIs on the Mac, lets me then go back to that very specific video and pull it up. So if I pull that up.
Another really useful thing that I found doing similar sort of qualitative stuff was having an attribute that anything I thought I wanted was effectively a pull quote.
Yeah.
I just have a Boolean for that. So I could basically have an agent then come back, and anything that I thought was a really explanatory quote, that would link me back to the note. The note itself will give me all the other context, like Michael's just been showing, like, if it backed off to a video or other, I was doing something different, but similarly, that gave me the extra layer of metadata. And I think one other thing that's changed over the 30 years, to take David's point, is that well, we now have the potential for linked data. I don't think we collectively have figured out what to do with it, because the number of people who can write and sort of comfortably understand it are vanishingly few. It doesn't merge well with librarianship, which is all about things that don't change, yet it's dynamic. But it's really pertinent. Another project I'm involved in is looking at basically working in XR, which causes you to question what a document is. If you're basically drawing white rectangles in a virtual space, well, we might as well give up now. But so all the richness of the metadata and the provenance you're talking about, potentially in the in the holodeck of XR, potentially could work. There's an awful lot of work to do. We don't have the writing tool. One thing we don't have is we don't have writing tools that are metadata aware.
Yeah.
What you're sort of seeing with some people's Tinderbox use is that sort of happening out of necessity, self-built. But there isn't a version of Word that does anything useful apart from make PDFs.
And to be honest, that's exactly how I use Word. I do all of my writing. My entire dissertation is being written in Tinderbox. The only time I touch Word is when I export it, because I have to get it to somebody else. And then the other thing I'll show you here. So if you see it at 25 minutes and 45 seconds, if I click this link, it actually pops up the video of the interview.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. We just,
and I can actually link it right back to the raw data. So that's the kind of other elements that are coming into this. But yeah, Paul, to your other question though, no performance issues at all, like 0, none. And then David, to your question earlier, my dissertation chair so loves this process that not only does she want to co-write a paper with me on it, they actually are thinking about me creating a class for the school.
Absolutely. This should be you can
all that.
You can sell a car in the case teaching method, one nut at a time, with what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I look at, this is history. I look at the issue of Isaac Newton the span between Isaac Newton in a very small, tiny world, basically two people that knew what they were talking about, Newton and Leibniz, and then to Mendeleev. So it took 150 years. We're still way out on the left-hand side of the curve when it comes to managing metadata.
Yeah.
In the world of, when people talk about data, I mean, I'm here in Boston. I mean, I'm an MIT wannabe. They have a very popular conference about data, and the talk, I mean, this is 1989. And they talk about data. They never talk about the systems that make the data. And what you just showed was the labyrinth of systematic process.
Yeah.
That's what you showed.
Yeah, and I'll be all honest, it's been a royal pain in the ass. I mean,
of course it is. Of course it is.
A lot of work. Yeah. Yeah. But again, but without Tinderbox, for me at least, because of my ADHD, impossible. Couldn't do it.
Oh yeah. I mean, the fact, I mean, I've harped on this thing before. The fact that now we have, with the piffle of an M3 laptop or whatever, $3,000 or $4,000 for a computer, and whatever Tinderbox costs, which is completely irrelevant.
If you're taking a trip with your friends, why pay for 4 hotel rooms to stay apart from your?
There you go. Sorry.
Who's that?
I clicked on the link in the chat.
But basically, we're putting supercomputers in the hands of people who have, no programming experience whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's magnificent to see what Mark Bernstein has put together, and Anderson, who's documented it, so that people who have a very vague idea of what they want to do, but they have no discipline of how to get there. Because the process of defining what your problem is and writing it down is really painful.
Yeah.
Everyone, let's get to the code. But anyway, enough of this rant. Beautiful, Michael. Beautiful.
But having said that, though, I think there is something to be said. And again, I know there's like a bunch of academic thinking around this part that others may be aware of, but there's something to be said with the iterative going back and forth between writing down what you want to do, going and playing with the code, going back to writing down what you want to do, going back, that iterative back and forth. I've in this process over the last 10 days, instrumentally educational, right? If I just focused on writing down what I wanted to do, I'd never actually do anything. If I just did, I'd never learn anything. It was the back and forth.
You only learn by doing it wrong.
Exactly. And believe me, I've done it wrong like for, gazillion times the last 10 days until I just 10 minutes before this meeting figured it out.
That's what these meetings are so much fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for letting me share that with you. That was fun. And if anybody ever has any other thoughts, comments, questions, let me know. But we can get back to our point. We have about 23 minutes left. Mark, you want to talk about some of the books and note-taking stuff that we were going to discuss? Like we've got Roland's book on the history of thinking on paper, which I've been reading, and I've been really enjoying that. Who has any other ideas? You're on mute, Mark.
Yeah, I actually have that right near the top. So tell us about Michael.
I'm only about third into it, but what I'm really liking about it is the opening of the book talks about the invention of the moleskin note-taking methodology. And just to help people who haven't read the book, I'll give you the background on it. There was a artisan, shop seller that was on a sailboat with a friend, and they were like, I need to find a highly repeatable, easily sellable, highly profitable product to be able to sell in my store. And they were talking about that while they were on the trip. And then, some weeks later, months later, someone was reading some articles and stories about stuff. And one of the comments she had read within the book was there was this guy who used to buy these books called handwritten notebooks called Moleskin, and he used to buy them in blocks of 50 or 60 because he was afraid they'd disappear. And then at some point, the company who made them went out of business, and they were fraught with anxiety because they no longer could take their notes. Long story short, they figure out it took them 2 years basically to build a paper hand notebook we all now know as Moleskin, that leather bound book. And it became a multi-billion-dollar business. And it was all about this idea of like, how do we think about things? How do we take notes? How do we combine our knowledge? How do we work together? And that's one of the core intakes that I got out of this process, is, again, just this incremental formalization. I thought was just fantastic. And
Dave Rogers,
really well written too.
I think you mentioned this book too, didn't you?
Yeah, this book is fascinating, and for a number of reasons, and one of which is how technology changes what we do. I guess the Florentines invented double entry bookkeeping because of paper. Once some Spanish Catalonian general conquered the Muslims in Spain, they got access to good quality paper making, and it spread through Europe. And the first thing, just like the Apple II, the first thing they did with it, they used it to do accounting. And then from accounting, it went into these, they had these accounting notebooks. People started writing in them, and they wrote in them for various reasons. One of the three letters, Ricordi, Ricordanzi, and Zibaldoni, were all in Florence, and the rate of literacy in Florence was higher than anywhere else in Italy or even Europe at that point because of these notebooks. The Zibaldoni is Apple Notes for me. Basically, everything that I collect, I throw it in an Apple Note or something like that. But it's fascinating. It's also fascinating because of the shipwreck that it discusses, that Bronze Age shipwreck, which also appears in 1177, the collapse of the Bronze civilization, because that's the most complete record we have of the very fertile trade that was going on all over the Mediterranean during the Bronze Age. But this is a wonderful book, a lot of fun. It's actually inspiring for taking notes.
Well, and it's so readable too. I mean,
very readable, very entertaining.
Great. It's a story. Yeah. All right.
Great. Another here that was just mentioned in the chat is the catalog of shipwrecked books. Christopher Columbus's sons set out on a serious book buying expedition, figuring that it was possible that it would require a very wealthy man, as he was, to collect all the books. And so he set out to collect all the printed books and developed a sideline of prints, and eventually left this to found a library with detailed instructions on how to catalog the collection and keep track of what you have. One of the things that he innovated is that hitherto libraries had stored books horizontally in boxes. And with parchment books, this was necessary because parchment warps unless you keep it under pressure. And so you had to keep books in special boxes, compress them, called book presses. But now that we're using paper, he came up with a very interesting idea of putting them edge on a shelf and having someone put some indication of the author and title on the spine, which no one had ever given any particular attention to. And also at the same time, a library number. So interesting guy in an intellectual life of a very different world, and also quite a readable book. One that hasn't been mentioned here before I wanted to plug is The Intellectual Life of the British Working Classes. which has one of the most spectacular academic first pages I've seen. It's exactly the sort of thing I adore. Starts by pointing out that naturally the intellectual life, philosophical positions, and attitudes of poor people in the past is very difficult for us to know anything about, because the people who have time to write about philosophy are, by definition, people who have leisure time and can spend time writing about philosophy. Your average coal miner certainly did not. So it would seem that this would be completely unrecoverable. But in fact, people wrote a great deal about their reading in their diaries. And he explains that there are thousands and thousands of diaries of Victorian working class people that are extant. And he has read almost all of them, and now he's going to tell us. So this is lots of fun, and
you're going to have him here as a
fascinating.
guest. You're going to have him here as a guest.
I am not sure he's with us, but several of the people on this list I am reaching out to and hope to have as a guest next year. Yes, Paul. When?
So speaking of eccentric English people writing, the upper class, if you will, I happen to have this book, which is a history of European scientific thought in the 19th century, that was written close to the turn of the century, around a little before 1900, and it's in 2 volumes. So it's big, thick, and in small type. He also did sort of a similar size thing of a history of philosophical thought. And the backstory on him was that his family had made a bunch of money in industrialization stuff. And so he had plenty of leisure time to order books and read them and write this. It's really well done. It's dense. He really did his homework on things and put it together. And when he died, apparently there were just an enormous number of books at his house, including the ones in the cartons that had never been opened. So I don't know what his notes were like, unfortunately, but he did the work.
Can you drop in the chat a link to that book that you just showed?
Yes.
Right. And then, by the way, before I forget, Mr. Bernstein, can you make sure to email me the or us the Tinderbox file you're showing here so we can put it up in the
Will do.
Perfect.
Another very different sort of book that I'm going through now is that when Francis Ford Coppola was offered The Godfather, well, first he'd flagged the book and assumed that with that cover and that title, it was a very intellectual European think book, which is the sort of book he likes. So he was very disappointed that it was Potboiler. And he did like the book at first reading, and then he thought maybe there is something here. So he made a prompt book, which is a stage manager's tool, where he takes each page of the novel, glues it onto a larger sheet, glues that into a notebook, and in detail annotates. And some years after the making of the film, it was known that this huge book survived as a loose leaf binder. And this is the photo facsimile of that binder. It is interestingly available in everything from a super premium signed numbered edition to Kindle. And the Kindle is, in fact, readable, which such visual books sometimes are not on Kindle. But it's a very interesting look at one individual note-taking process where many of us know the end result fairly well. Yeah, Win. Is your hand still up or up
No,
again?
my hand is still not up. Sorry.
Sorry.
Your book, Win. Your book. Title of the book.
Yes.
Follow up, annotate.
I was looking for a link to it, and I'm just going to drop the title because it's available in lots of different places.
One guy's who has already been a guest here is Jorge Arango, and his duly noted now has a publication date of January 4th. So this should be out any day now. I'm betting some other people have read Building a Second Brain here. Does anyone want to? Yeah, Michael, do you want to talk about it a little?
Yeah, well, it's a great book, but it's really focuses mostly on process than it does technology. And the whole idea is you apply his para methodology to basically, organize your thinking, organize your thoughts, build your tasks, and methodic. And then once you've done with the project, archive it out. So it's not lost, but no longer in the RAM memory of what you're currently working on. So it's a whole methodology and process about thinking and being more efficient with your work. But what I find really interesting is he doesn't really get into tools as much as like we do here. It's more of just, this is a way of going about doing it, and then go find the tools that work for you to do the process, which is something else we often talk about. Is there is no one universal tool for everyone. Even like I try to use Tinderbox for nearly everything, but as I demonstrated today, there's places where it simply doesn't make sense and you can't. So you just got to find the right tools that work for you. But for those that are looking, I see it really as a methodological approach for project management, in such that it allows you to document what you're doing externally and getting it out of your head so you can be more efficient. So it's fantastic. And he's built an entire business around the concepts and training courses and all of that. It's really, really well worth it.
Another book that hasn't been discussed here that's really quite interesting is Madison's Hand by Mary Sarah Bilder a couple of years ago. It turns out that Madison, who wrote the Constitution of the United States, took notes which survive during the Constitutional Convention. And this book is going through this notebook. Quite interesting. A writer I adore is Nick Hornby, who's probably still best known for High Fidelity. But he, for many years, wrote a column for The Believer on things I've read, which literally started each month with a list of books bought and books read. There was frequently no overlap at all. But it's a very interesting personal history of a serious reader's serious reading. Michael Dirda, who has agreed to come visit us one day, but we haven't got a date yet, was for many years editor of Washington Post Book World. Fascinating guy I know from a local reading conference. But he has several volumes of reviews and short notes. I think Bound to Please may be the best, but it's lots of fun, including a wonderful essay on how to select books for your guest room, which is actually not a topic that I've spent much time thinking about, but because he spent the time thinking about it, I don't have to. Dirda has a review, I believe this week, maybe last week, in I think the Post, of a book called The Manuscripts Club, which is about manuscripts and people who have collected them through the ages, which is a whole lot of notes about books. And I haven't seen the book yet, but it sounds fascinating. Several books, in fact, New York Review of Books has a double review of other books about the invention of writing. This is a nice treatment of how numbers happened. And we actually know how the alphabet was developed and how it devolved from numbers. And the numbers were for bookkeeping. The bookkeeping was almost certainly because it was a fraud prevention measure. And the critical realization was that instead of writing 10 sheep as the symbol for sheep iterated 10 times, you could save keystrokes, so to speak, by talking about a bushel of sheep or a big bowl of sheep. Big bowls were measures for grain. So a bushel of sheep was a useful way of saying a gang of sheep or 6 sheep or a crew for doing road work for one day, a bushel of guys. And this actually turned out to be terrifically useful and important. So I will post this sometime real soon. This is going to be in the list too. It's still not here. I yanked back a chapter, and yes, both went absolutely right. Both Robert Caro's book Working and the movie about Robert Caro and Robert Gottlieb, Turn Every Page, dandy documentary.
Yes, the documentary was fabulous.
Yes, and Dave.
So you mentioned the intellectual lives of the British working class. When I started reading about the Notebook and everything, I wanted to go back to find out what had been written about Eric Hoffer and what his process was, because he's known as a longshoreman philosopher. He's self-taught. I'm beginning to be skeptical of a lot of his background and more critical of his thinking. But there's surprisingly little that has been written to document, his notebooks. He would write during lunch. He was a very modest person in terms of his social life. So whatever free time he had, he devoted to his thinking and to recording it, apparently in notebooks. And the other action I was able to find was that he would use 3x5 index cards and type quotations that he wanted to think about and save on 3x5 index cards. Not exactly a Zettelkasten. But Stanford, I guess, has the whole collection of his notebooks, but they have not been, to my knowledge, digitized or scanned or anything to be made available. I was surprised by that, but that's just another person who is not a formal academic, but whose thought, specifically a true believer, was held, perhaps still is, in some high regard.
Terrific. Any other last words?
No, I can't wait to finish my dissertation so I can dig into these books. Awesome. But one last word though, in all seriousness, no, Mark. I started Tinderbox like 14 years ago, didn't know how to use it, rediscovered it 4 years ago. This is an old story we've heard many times, but I just want to be, as we close out the year with gratitude, I just really want to thank you and this community. I'm on this side of the dirt because of all of you, and I really appreciate it. Would not be doing anything near what I'm capable of doing today without all of you. So, and this tool. So thank you.
Great. And there will be new one coming soon. Yes.
Mark Bernstein, I see a new cover on Tinderbox Way. Is there a new physical paper edition?
No, that's an old cover, actually. I grabbed the wrong one.
Okay.
Got it.
Great.
I've got
Okay.
my number in here too. All right, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thanks so much.
Bye. See you, Mr. Mark.
Take care.